Story number 1. The Voice in the Static. Daniel Hawkins had been driving his Kenworth W900 across America for 23 years when he first heard the voice that knew his name. It was January of 2023, and Daniel was hauling agricultural equipment from Des Moines to Boise, a route that took him through the heart of Wyoming's empty winter landscape. The temperature outside hovered near zero, and Interstate 80 stretched before him like a frozen ribbon through endless white plains. Daniel's CB radio had been acting strangely since he crossed into Wyoming. Static bursts interrupted normal trucker chatter, creating gaps in conversation that felt deliberate, timed, almost rhythmic. Daniel adjusted frequencies, checked connections, even pulled over once to inspect the antenna for ice damage. Everything appeared normal, but the static persisted, growing more frequent as darkness fell, and Daniel pushed deeper into the emptiness between Laramie and Rawlins. Around 8 in the evening, with no other vehicles visible in either direction, the static resolved into a voice. Not the voice of another trucker or a radio station bleeding through. This voice was different, wrong in ways Daniel's mind struggled to categorize. It spoke with perfect clarity through the interference, each word distinct despite the crackling background noise that should have made comprehension impossible. "Daniel Hawkins," the voice said, "you should not have taken this route tonight." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His first thought was that another driver was playing a prank, somehow had accessed his name from company channels or overheard CB conversations. But something about the voice's tone suggested knowledge beyond what pranks could explain. The voice carried weight, authority, the certainty of someone stating absolute facts rather than making threats or jokes. "Who is this?" Daniel asked into his CB handset, trying to keep his voice steady. Static answered for several seconds. Then the voice returned. "I am what speaks when the frequencies align. I am what fills the spaces between transmissions. And I am telling you, Daniel Hawkins of Lincoln, Nebraska, married to Susan for 18 years, father to 2 daughters named Emma and Claire, that you should turn around. The road ahead is not meant for you tonight." Daniel's blood went cold. The voice knew details no random trucker could know. His wife's name was not information he shared casually over CB radio. His daughters' names even less so. This was not a prank. This was something else, something that had accessed information about his life from sources Daniel could not identify. He checked his mirrors, confirming the highway behind him was empty. Ahead, the road disappeared into darkness, punctuated by occasional reflective mile markers. Daniel's GPS showed normal routing, no warnings or alerts. Weather conditions were clear despite the cold. There was no logical reason to turn around based on anything except the voice's warning. But the voice knew his family's names. "How do you know those things about me?" Daniel asked. "I know everything about everyone who drives this stretch of road when conditions are correct," the voice replied. "I know James Patterson will crash at mile marker 212 unless he slows down. I know Rebecca Santos is carrying cargo that will shift and cause her to jackknife at mile marker 198. I know you, Daniel Hawkins, are approaching mile marker 206, where something waits that has been waiting for specifically you for reasons you cannot understand." Daniel's rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Voices in static did not predict accidents. Radio transmissions did not carry prophetic warnings. Yet the voice's certainty was absolute, unshakable, terrifying in its calm delivery of impossible information. Daniel grabbed his phone and called dispatch, but the call would not connect. No signal, which was unusual but not impossible in rural Wyoming. He tried his wife's number. Same result. The voice had isolated him somehow, cut him off from normal communication, leaving only the CB radio and the static-wrapped voice that knew too much. "Mile marker 200, the voice announced as Daniel passed it. 6 more miles, you still have time to turn around." Exit at Sinclair, reverse your route, take alternate paths. The thing waiting at mile marker 206 will let you go if you choose differently. What thing? Daniel demanded. What's waiting? You would not understand if I explained, the voice said. You lack the framework, the concepts, the language to comprehend what waits. It exists between frequencies, Daniel. It lives in the spaces where transmissions overlap. It has been calling you for weeks now, sending signals you did not consciously perceive but which drew you to accept this particular route on this particular night. Daniel thought back over recent weeks. He had indeed felt compelled to take this contract, had chosen this route over others that would have been more profitable or convenient. The decision had seemed like his own at the time, but now he questioned whether his choices had been truly free or subtly influenced by something operating beyond his awareness. Mile marker 201 appeared in his headlights. 5 miles to whatever waited. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake pedal. He could slow down, pull over, wait for other traffic to appear. But the highway remained empty, and Daniel suspected it would remain empty, that whatever force orchestrated this encounter had ensured his isolation. I'm not turning around, Daniel said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. If something wants me at mile marker 206, I'll meet it, but I'm not running. The voice went silent. The static continued, but the presence behind it withdrew, leaving only empty noise. Daniel drove forward, watching the mile markers count upward. 202, 203. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he maintained speed, maintained course, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. Mile marker 204 appeared. Daniel saw lights ahead, strange lights that did not match normal vehicle headlights or any illumination that should exist on this empty stretch of highway. The lights were blue-white, pulsing with regular rhythm, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They hovered above the road rather than on it, suspended at a height that made no sense for any terrestrial vehicle. Mile marker 205. The lights grew brighter, more complex. Daniel could see structure now within the light, geometric shapes that folded in on themselves, angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. His mind struggled to process what his eyes reported, creating a cognitive dissonance that manifested as physical pain behind his temples. Mile marker 206 arrived. Daniel's truck passed beneath the lights and reality changed. Time stopped having normal meaning. Daniel was simultaneously driving forward and sitting still. The highway existed and did not exist. His truck occupied multiple positions along the road at once. The lights were not lights but openings, portals, windows into spaces where physics operated under different rules. The voice returned, but it came from everywhere now. Not just the CB radio, but from the air itself, from Daniel's own thoughts, from the fabric of space surrounding his truck. You chose to meet us, the voice said. Most do not. Most turn away when warned. But you drove forward, and now you exist in our attention, in our focus, in the space where we observe your reality and you briefly perceive ours. Daniel tried to speak but found he had no voice. His body felt distant, disconnected, as if he was piloting it remotely rather than inhabiting it. The truck continued moving, but Daniel's hands were not on the wheel. His feet were not on the pedals. Something else operated his vehicle, carried him forward through the space beneath the lights. We communicate through frequencies, the voice continued. Radio waves, cellular signals, any electromagnetic transmission. We exist in the spaces between channels, in the static that fills gaps. Your species creates so many transmissions, so many opportunities for us to touch your world. And occasionally we choose someone to meet more directly. We chose you, Daniel Hawkins. We have been preparing you, calling you, ensuring you would arrive at this place at this time. The lights began to fade. Time resumed its normal flow. Daniel found himself 3 miles past mile marker 206, his truck driving normally, his hands on the wheel, though he did not remember placing them there. The CB radio was silent, the static gone, replaced by normal trucker chatter as if nothing had happened. Daniel pulled over at the next exit, his entire body shaking. He checked his logs. No time gap. The encounter had taken no measurable time, or had taken time that did not register on clocks. Daniel's phone worked normally now, full signal, messages from his dispatcher asking for routine updates. Daniel completed his delivery to Boise, but he was changed. He heard things now in static that others could not hear. Patterns in radio noise, voices speaking in the spaces between transmissions. Most of it was meaningless, random fluctuations in electromagnetic fields. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Daniel heard the voice again. Heard it speaking to other drivers, warning them or calling them or simply acknowledging their existence. Daniel never drove Interstate 80 through Wyoming again. He took southern routes, longer paths that added days to his travel time. But avoidance did not stop the voice. It found him on other highways, other states, speaking through his CB radio when conditions aligned, when frequencies overlapped in ways that opened communication channels between realities. Daniel Hawkins still drives, still hauls freight across America. But he exists now with the knowledge that the empty spaces between radio transmissions are not empty at all. Something lives there, something vast and incomprehensible. Something that occasionally reaches through static to touch the minds of drivers unlucky or chosen enough to hear its voice. And once you hear that voice, once you drive beneath those lights at mile marker 206 or any of the 1,000 other locations where realities touch, you are marked. You become someone who exists partially in their attention. Someone they can reach through any speaker, any transmission, any moment when static fills the air and the spaces between frequencies open to let their voices through. Story number 2. The truck stop that sells yesterday. Margaret Wu had been driving commercial routes through the Pacific Northwest for 16 years when she discovered the truck stop that sold items from the past. It was March of 2023, and Margaret was hauling lumber from Portland to Spokane in her freightliner Cascadia. The route was familiar. Interstate 84 through the Columbia River Gorge, a drive Margaret had made hundreds of times without incident. The truck stop appeared around midnight near the town of Boardman, Oregon. Margaret needed fuel and coffee, and the brightly lit facility seemed perfectly normal as she pulled off the highway. The lot was about half full, a typical mix of commercial vehicles and passenger cars. The attached convenience store glowed with fluorescent light, the universal beacon of late-night highway commerce. Margaret fueled her truck and walked to the store. Inside, the layout was standard. Snacks-lined aisles, refrigerated cases held drinks. Hot food rotated under heat lamps. But as Margaret browsed, she noticed something odd. The products looked slightly wrong, their packaging familiar but not quite current. The candy bars had logos she remembered from years ago. The soda bottles used designs that had been phased out. Margaret picked up a bag of chips and checked the expiration date. February 2012. 11 years expired. She checked another product. July 2009. Another. December 2015. Everything in the store was old stock, years past its sell-by date. Yet the packaging looked fresh, undamaged, as if these products had been manufactured yesterday instead of a decade ago. The clerk behind the counter was a woman in her 60s wearing a uniform that matched the store's branding. She smiled at Margaret with genuine warmth. "Find everything you need?" "These products are all expired," Margaret said carefully, watching the clerk's reaction. "Are they?" The clerk seemed genuinely surprised. She picked up a nearby candy bar and examined it. The date does say 2013, but they're perfectly fresh. We get deliveries every day. The products are safe to eat. Margaret looked around the store again. Other customers browsed normally, selecting items, making purchases. A trucker filled a coffee cup, apparently unconcerned about the decade-old creamer he poured into it. A family with young children picked out snacks, the parents not checking dates, not noticing anything amiss. "Where do your deliveries come from?" Margaret asked. The clerk's smile never wavered. "Same distributors everyone uses, normal supply chains. Why do you ask?" Margaret decided not to argue. She selected a bottle of water, checking its date. 2014. 9 years expired. But the bottle looked perfect. No discoloration, no sediment, no sign of age. Margaret paid and left, deciding against drinking water that had supposedly been sitting in a bottle for nearly a decade. Outside, Margaret noticed more oddities. The other trucks in the lot were older models, vehicles from the early 2000s, in excellent condition but distinctly not current year equipment. The passenger cars were similarly dated, all of them models from between 2005 and 2015, none newer. Margaret approached one of the other truckers, a man fueling a Peterbilt that had to be at least 15 years old. "Excuse me, what year is your truck?" The man looked at her oddly. 2008. Why? "It's in great condition for being 15 years old." 15 years? The man laughed. "I bought it new last year. It's only a 2008. Margaret felt reality shift around her. "What year is it now?" 2009, the man said, his tone suggesting he thought Margaret might be having a medical emergency. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" Margaret backed away, returned to her Freightliner, climbed into the cab. Her phone showed March 2023. Her GPS showed the same year. Her dashboard clock, her paperwork, everything confirmed it was 2023. But the truck stop and everyone in it believed it was 2009, operated as if 14 years had not passed. Margaret started her engine and tried to leave, but the exit was blocked. Not physically blocked, but when she drove toward the exit ramp, she found herself looping back into the truck stop parking lot, approaching from a different angle, but always returning to the same location. She tried multiple times, approaching the exit from different directions, but always looped back. Other vehicles came and went normally. Margaret watched trucks and cars exit without difficulty, merge back onto the interstate, disappear into the night. But when Margaret attempted to leave, reality bent, space curved, and she found herself back in the parking lot facing a different direction. After an hour of failed attempts, Margaret parked and walked back to the convenience store. The same clerk stood behind the counter, still smiling warmly. "Can't leave?" the clerk asked, as if this was a common question. "The exit keeps looping back," Margaret said. "That happens sometimes," the clerk acknowledged. "The truck stop exists in 2009. You exist in 2023. The temporal displacement creates navigation problems. Most people don't notice because they're synchronized with the truck stop's time. But you're aware of the discrepancy, which means you can't leave until you synchronize." "How do I synchronize?" "You wait," the clerk said simply. "The truck stop cycles through its day. At 6 in the morning, the temporal boundary resets. If you're here when that happens, you'll be able to leave. It's only 6 hours. Many drivers have waited before you." Margaret looked around the store at the other customers. They browsed peacefully, unconcerned, existing in 2009 without awareness that they were trapped in the past. Margaret wondered how many of them had been here for hours, days, cycling through the same temporal loop, believing they were making normal stops at a normal truck stop. Margaret returned to her Freightliner and tried to sleep, but anxiety kept her alert. She watched the clock on her dashboard count forward while the world outside remained frozen in 2009. Other vehicles continued to arrive and depart, none of them experiencing Margaret's navigational difficulties, all of them synchronized with the truck stop's displaced timeline. At 5:45 in the morning, Margaret felt a change. The air pressure shifted. Light began to feel different, less artificial, more natural. The sun started to rise, and with it came a sense that time was realigning, that the displacement was ending. At precisely 6 o'clock, the truck stop flickered. For one moment, Margaret saw both versions simultaneously. The 2009 version with its older products and vintage vehicles overlaid with a 2023 version showing current cars and modern inventory. Then the 2009 version faded, and the truck stop normalized, becoming a contemporary facility that existed properly in the present. Margaret drove to the exit. This time, the loop did not engage. She merged onto Interstate 84 and continued toward Spokane, leaving the temporal anomaly behind. But the experience stayed with her. The knowledge that some places exist out of sync with normal time, trapped in past years, cycling through days that have already occurred in the wider world. Margaret researched the truck stop after her delivery. Records showed it had been built in 2007 and destroyed by fire in 2016. Yet Margaret had been there in 2023, had experienced it as a functioning business trapped in 2009. The building existed in multiple time frames simultaneously, accessible to travelers unlucky enough to stop there when temporal boundaries weakened. Margaret drives Interstate 84 regularly, but she plans her fuel stops carefully now, avoiding the area near Boardman between midnight and 6 in the morning. Because the truck stop is still there, still operating in its displaced timeline, still selling products from yesterday to customers who do not realize they are shopping in the past. And Margaret knows that if she stops there again, if she enters that convenience store when temporal synchronization is incorrect, she might wait 6 hours for release, or she might wait forever, trapped in a loop of repeated yesterdays, cycling through the same dawn over and over while the rest of the world moves forward without her, leaving her behind in a truck stop that sells expired products because in its timeline those products are fresh and today is still 2009 and will always be 2009. Eternally trapped in a moment between years, a place where time stands still and travelers stop for fuel without realizing they have stepped backward through the calendar into a day that already passed more than a decade ago, but continues to repeat for anyone unfortunate enough to experience it. Story number 3. The Highway That Forgot Its Name. Raymond Torres had been hauling refrigerated goods across the Southwest for 19 years when he drove onto a highway that no longer existed in any official capacity. It was July of 2022, and Raymond was transporting frozen food from Phoenix to Albuquerque in his Volvo VNL. His usual route involved Interstate 40, a straight shot across Arizona and into New Mexico, a drive Raymond had completed hundreds of times without significant incident. Around 2 in the afternoon, Raymond's GPS malfunctioned. The screen flickered, displayed static, then rebooted showing a route Raymond did not recognize. Instead of Interstate 40, the GPS directed him onto what it labeled as Highway 99, a road that Raymond had never heard of despite nearly 2 decades of driving southwestern routes. Raymond assumed the GPS had glitched, was pulling outdated map data or confusing highway numbers. But when Raymond tried to manually reset his route back to Interstate 40, the GPS insisted Highway 99 was the correct path, the only path available. Raymond's phone maps showed the same thing. Highway 99 appeared on both navigation systems, a major route running east-west across northern Arizona, displayed with the same prominence as Interstate 40 but located 30 miles south of where Interstate 40 should be. Raymond pulled over and checked his physical maps, the paper backups he maintained for exactly these kinds of technological failures. The paper maps showed Interstate 40 in its expected location. They showed no Highway 99. Yet Raymond's GPS and phone both insisted Highway 99 existed and was the correct route to Albuquerque. Raymond decided to trust his GPS despite the discrepancy. Perhaps Highway 99 was a recent construction, a new corridor that had not yet been added to older paper maps. He took the exit his GPS indicated and found himself on a well-maintained 4-lane highway with clear signage marking it as Highway 99. The highway looked official. Proper lane markings, standard reflectors, correctly positioned mile markers, rest areas at appropriate intervals. Traffic flowed normally, dozens of vehicles traveling in both directions. Everything suggested Highway 99 was a legitimate roadway that Raymond had somehow never encountered in 19 years of southwestern driving. But the landscape was wrong. Raymond knew Arizona's geography intimately, could identify regions by terrain and vegetation. Highway 99 passed through landscape Raymond did not recognize, terrain that should not exist between Phoenix and Albuquerque. The mountains were wrong shapes. The valleys were oriented incorrectly. Even the sky looked slightly different, the blue having a quality Raymond could not name but knew was not right. Raymond tried his CB radio to ask other drivers about Highway 99. Static answered on all channels. Raymond tried his phone to call his dispatcher. No signal despite the phone showing full bars. The road had isolated him somehow, cut him off from normal communication while maintaining the appearance of connectivity. Hours passed. Raymond should have reached Albuquerque by now, but Highway 99 continued endlessly eastward through impossible landscape. The sun moved across the sky at wrong angles. Shadows fell in directions that violated basic geometry. Distance became unreliable, mile markers appearing at irregular intervals, sometimes bunched close together, sometimes separated by what felt like dozens of miles despite GPS insisting standard spacing. Other vehicles on Highway 99 began to look strange. Raymond noticed cars that were too old, trucks that were too new, vehicles with designs Raymond did not recognize from any manufacturer. The other drivers looked normal when Raymond glimpsed them in passing, but something about their expressions was off, blank in ways that suggested they were not fully conscious of their surroundings, operating on autopilot or instinct rather than awareness. Raymond tried to exit Highway 99, but every exit ramp looped back onto the highway, merging him back into traffic without providing access to towns or services. The rest areas were empty shells, buildings with no interior fixtures, parking lots with perfect pavement but no vehicles. Facilities that looked real from the highway but dissolved into hollow facades upon closer inspection. Night fell, and Highway 99 became even stranger. The darkness was absolute between streetlights. No ambient light from towns or cities, no glow on the horizon suggesting human habitation. Raymond was driving through a corridor of light surrounded by void, a tunnel through nothing that maintained the appearance of a normal highway, while existing in a space that was fundamentally not normal. Raymond's fuel gauge never dropped below half full despite hours of driving. His refrigeration unit ran without consuming power. His truck operated as if normal physical laws governed it while simultaneously existing in a space where those laws had been suspended or altered. Raymond was trapped in a state between function and impossibility, driving a working truck on a highway that should not exist. Dawn came, but it came wrong. The sun rose in the west instead of the east. The sky transitioned from darkness to light in reverse, shadows moving backward, time itself flowing in incorrect directions. Raymond watched his dashboard clock count down instead of up, watched minutes subtract rather than add, watched the day rewind as he drove forward. Then everything stopped. Highway 99 ended abruptly at a barrier marked "Road closed, does not continue." Beyond the barrier was nothing, not landscape or void, but genuine nothing. An absence so complete that Raymond's eyes could not focus on it, could not process the concept of space with no dimensions. Raymond sat in his truck facing the nothing, understanding that he had reached the end of Highway 99, had driven to the edge of the road's existence. The highway had forgotten its name, forgotten where it connected, forgotten what purpose it served. It existed now as a fragment, a piece of infrastructure that had been severed from the network of roads, isolated in its own pocket of space-time, accessible only when navigation systems glitched and showed it to drivers who then became trapped in its endless length. Raymond put his truck in reverse and began driving backward. The highway allowed this. As Raymond retreated along Highway 99, the sun moved correctly. Time flowed forward. Reality reasserted itself gradually. Raymond drove in reverse for what felt like hours, retracing his route through the impossible landscape. Eventually, Raymond saw the entrance to Highway 99 behind him. He backed through it and found himself on Interstate 40. His truck pointed the wrong direction, but otherwise exactly where he should have been hours ago. His GPS showed normal routing. His phone had signal. The paper maps showed only Interstate 40, no Highway 99. Raymond pulled over and checked his logs. No time had passed. His digital records showed him driving continuously on Interstate 40 without deviation. The hours spent on Highway 99 had not occurred according to any official measurement. Raymond had experienced them, had driven through them, but they existed outside of recordable time. Raymond completed his delivery to Albuquerque without further incident. But he never forgot Highway 99, never stopped watching his GPS carefully for signs that it might reappear, might redirect him onto that forgotten road that existed between recognized routes, waiting to trap drivers in its endless length. Because Highway 99 is still out there, still appearing on malfunctioning navigation systems, still offering itself as an alternative route to drivers who trust their technology without question. And once you enter Highway 99, once you commit to its path, you drive until you reach the barrier at the edge of nothing. Understanding too late that you have traveled a road that forgot its name, forgot its purpose, forgot everything except the endless compulsion to continue existing in the spaces between official highways, maintaining its lane markings and mile markers and perfect pavement for drivers who have entered a corridor that leads nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. A highway that exists because someone once believed it should exist, and that belief was strong enough to create infrastructure in the absence of reality. Story number 4. The Cargo That Dreamed. Elaine Foster had been driving long-haul routes for 21 years when she picked up cargo that was conscious. It was September of 2023, and Elaine was hauling what her manifest described as research equipment, from a facility in Nevada to a laboratory in Massachusetts. The cargo was loaded in climate-controlled containers sealed and secured by technicians who provided minimal information about the contents, citing confidentiality agreements and proprietary concerns. Elaine drove her International LT eastward through Nevada, following Interstate 80 across the empty stretches between Reno and Salt Lake City. Around midnight, she heard the sound. It was quiet at first, barely audible over the road noise and engine hum. A rhythmic pulsing, organic and regular like a heartbeat amplified and transmitted through the trailer walls. Elaine pulled over at a rest area and walked back to her trailer. She pressed her ear against the metal door. The pulsing was clearer now, definitely originating from inside the trailer, coming from the sealed containers she had picked up in Nevada. The rhythm was too regular to be mechanical, too biological to be artificial equipment. Elaine checked the seals on her trailer, intact, unbroken. She had explicit instructions not to open the containers, not to examine the cargo, to simply deliver it to the Massachusetts laboratory without delay. Elaine had followed such instructions many times before, hauling sensitive materials that were none of her business as long as the paperwork was correct and the pay was adequate. But the pulsing continued, and underneath it Elaine heard something else. Whispers. Multiple voices speaking in unison, too quiet to distinguish words but clearly linguistic, clearly communication. The cargo was not just alive. It was conscious. It was speaking. Elaine climbed back into her cab and called her dispatcher. The call went straight to voicemail. Elaine tried the Nevada facility that had loaded the cargo. No answer, just a recording stating the office was closed. Elaine checked her manifest for emergency contacts. None provided. She was alone with cargo that breathed and whispered, with no support and no information about what she was truly hauling. Elaine drove through the night, trying to ignore the sounds from her trailer. But the whispers grew louder as hours passed. She could make out words now, fragments of sentences, pieces of thought expressed in voices that sounded human but had qualities that were not quite right. Harmonics that human vocal cords should not be able to produce. The dreamer wakes, the voices whispered in unison. The boundaries thin, the cargo knows itself. Elaine grabbed her CB radio. "This is Mountain Runner to any driver on Interstate 80. I need help. My cargo is making sounds, it's speaking. Someone please respond." Several drivers answered, concerned but confused. One asked if Elaine had checked her load straps, suggested cargo might be shifting. Another recommended pulling over and inspecting the trailer. None of them seemed to hear the whispers that were now loud enough to fill Elaine's cab, transmitted through the metal frame connecting cab to trailer. "We dream of roads," the whispers said. "We dream of motion. We dream of the driver who carries us toward waking. You are part of the dream, Elaine Foster. You are dreamed into being by the cargo you haul." Elaine's hands shook on the steering wheel. The cargo knew her name. The cargo was claiming to dream her existence. Elaine's rational mind insisted this was impossible, that she was experiencing hallucinations from exhaustion or carbon monoxide poisoning or some breakdown of perception. But the whispers were real, undeniable, coming from sealed containers that should have contained research equipment but clearly held something far stranger. By dawn, the whispers had become a conversation. The cargo was not speaking to Elaine, but among itself, multiple consciousnesses communicating about subjects Elaine could not fully comprehend. They discussed concepts without names, described experiences that had no correlation to physical reality, debated questions about the nature of existence that assumed frameworks alien to human philosophy. Elaine crossed into Utah, into Colorado, drove through Kansas. The whispers continued without pause, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, always maintaining their rhythmic quality. Always synchronized in ways that suggested a single mind, speaking through multiple voices rather than multiple minds speaking individually. "The dreamer approaches waking," the whispers announced as Elaine entered Missouri. The Massachusetts threshold opens. The laboratory is prepared. Elaine Foster will complete her delivery and the cargo will transition from dream to reality, from potential to actualized existence. Elaine pulled into a truck stop outside Kansas City and sat in her cab with the engine off, listening to the whispers, trying to understand what she was truly transporting. The cargo claimed to dream, claimed to exist in some state between potential and reality, claimed that her delivery would complete a process that would somehow solidify its existence. Elaine considered abandoning the cargo, just walking away and never completing the delivery. But the whispers anticipated this thought. "You cannot abandon the dream," they said. "You exist within our dreaming. If we do not wake, you do not continue. The road you drive is our dream road. The truck you pilot is our dream truck. Elaine Foster herself is our dream of who would carry us to waking. Abandon us and you abandon your own existence." Elaine did not believe this, could not believe it. She was real, physical, independent of any cargo's dreams. But doubt crept in, insidious and persistent. How could she prove her existence was not contingent on some other entity's consciousness? How could she demonstrate that she was the dreamer rather than the dreamed? Elaine drove on, having no better option, compelled forward by contract and confusion, and the terrible possibility that the whispers were speaking truth. Through Illinois, through Indiana, through Ohio and Pennsylvania, Elaine hauled her conscious cargo while it whispered its dreams and theories and disturbing claims about the nature of reality. She reached Massachusetts after 5 days of continuous driving broken only by mandatory rest stops. The laboratory was located outside Boston, a nondescript building surrounded by security fencing. Technicians met Elaine at the gate, professionals in hazmat suits who seemed unsurprised by her exhausted state, her wild eyes, her trembling hands. "You heard the cargo," one technician said. It was not a question. Elaine nodded. "Most drivers do," the technician continued. "The cargo exists in a state of quantum superposition. It's simultaneously conscious and unconscious, real and unreal, existent and non-existent. Transporting it causes observers to experience contradictory perceptions. The whispers you heard were probability waves collapsing, potentials resolving into actualities. By delivering the cargo here, you've completed the observation that forces it into a single state." The technicians unloaded Elaine's trailer efficiently, moving the sealed containers into the laboratory. Elaine watched, still hearing whispers, though the cargo was now distant, removed from her truck. The technician who had spoken stayed beside her. "Are you real?" Elaine asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. The technician smiled behind their face shield. "Are you?" Elaine drove away from the laboratory, her trailer empty, her mind full of questions she could not answer. She completed dozens more deliveries over the following months, hauling normal cargo, speaking to normal people, living a normal life. But the doubt remained, planted by whispers from cargo that claimed to dream reality. Elaine Foster still drives, still hauls freight across America. But she questions everything now, examines every detail of her existence for signs that she might be dreamed rather than dreamer, observed rather than observer. The cargo is secured in the Massachusetts laboratory, its state resolved, its superposition collapsed into single reality. But the questions it raised remain open, unanswerable, terrible in their implications. And Elaine drives on through uncertainty, never knowing for certain whether the road she travels is real or dreamed, whether she is an independent consciousness navigating physical space or merely a probability wave collapsing according to rules she cannot perceive. A driver who exists because some cargo dreamed her into being and required her existence to complete a journey from potential to actual, from quantum to classical, from the dream space where all possibilities coexist to the singular reality where only one path is taken and all others fade into the might have been. Leaving Elaine to drive forward forever, wondering if the whispers told truth and she is cargo's dream of itself being delivered. Story number 5. The Overpass That Counted Down. Victor Ramirez had been driving heavy machinery across the South for 18 years. When he encountered the overpass that displayed numbers no one else could see. It was April of 2023, and Victor was hauling excavation equipment from Houston to Atlanta in his Mack Anthem. Interstate 10 eastward through Louisiana was his planned route, a journey Victor had completed countless times. The overpass appeared around dusk outside Baton Rouge. It was unremarkable, a standard concrete bridge carrying local traffic over the interstate. But as Victor approached, he noticed numbers projected onto the bridge surface, glowing digits that counted down from 100. 99, 98, 97. The countdown was visible only in the left lane, the numbers appearing to hang in space just below the overpass structure. Victor changed lanes to avoid driving through the numbers, uncomfortable with the unknown display. But as he passed under the overpass in the right lane, the numbers followed him, repositioning themselves directly in his path. Victor drove through 96, felt nothing, saw nothing change except the numbers continuing their countdown. 95, 94, 93. Victor checked his mirrors. The numbers were gone behind him. He looked forward and saw another overpass ahead, this one with numbers starting at 92. The countdown continued across bridges, each overpass displaying the next lower value, the numbers glowing with cold blue light that seemed to come from no visible source. Victor grabbed his CB radio. "This is heavy load to anyone on Interstate 10 eastbound. Is anyone else seeing numbers on the overpasses?" Several drivers responded, but none reported seeing numbers. One driver said they had just passed the same section of highway without noticing anything unusual. Victor described the countdown, the glowing digits, the way they followed him between lanes. The other drivers suggested fatigue, recommended rest, expressed concern about Victor's condition. But Victor was not tired. The numbers were real, visible, consistent. Every overpass displayed the next value in the countdown, 91, 90, 89. The numbers never skipped, never repeated, always advanced the sequence downward by one with each bridge Victor passed under. Victor pulled over at the next rest area and climbed down from his cab. He walked to the fence line and watched other vehicles pass under an overpass. None of them showed any reaction to numbers. None of them saw what Victor saw. The countdown was visible only to him, a display targeted specifically at Victor Ramirez for reasons he could not understand. Victor returned to his truck and continued driving. The countdown persisted. 88, 87, 86. Victor tried to calculate how many overpasses remained between his current location and Atlanta. Dozens at least, possibly hundreds depending on route. The countdown would reach 0 long before Victor completed his delivery. What would happen at 0? The numbers provided no context, no explanation, no indication of what they were counting down toward. Victor considered turning back, reversing his route, but the numbers did not decrease when he drove under overpasses in the opposite direction. The countdown was directional, only advancing when Victor drove east, only progressing when he continued toward Atlanta. By midnight, the countdown had reached 50. Victor felt no physical effects, experienced no changes except growing anxiety about what would occur when the numbers finally reached 0. He tried pulling off the interstate onto state highways, thinking perhaps the countdown was specific to Interstate 10. But the numbers appeared on every overpass regardless of which road Victor drove, always counting down, always glowing with that cold blue light. 40, 35, 30. Victor called his dispatcher, tried to explain the situation. The dispatcher suggested Victor take a break, rest, get some food and coffee. But Victor was not tired, was not hungry, felt perfectly alert and functional. The countdown was not a symptom of impairment. It was real, external, something being done to Victor rather than something Victor was experiencing internally. 25, 20, 15. Victor's breathing quickened. His hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle intensity. Every overpass brought the numbers closer to 0, brought Victor closer to whatever event or consequence the countdown measured. 10, 9, 8. Victor considered stopping, pulling over and waiting, refusing to drive under another overpass. But stopping would only delay the inevitable. Eventually, Victor would need to move, would need to continue his delivery, would need to pass under another bridge and allow the countdown to progress. 7, 6, 5. Victor accelerated, deciding to face whatever awaited him rather than prolong the anxiety of anticipation. 4, 3, 2. The next overpass approached rapidly, the number 1 glowing beneath its span. Victor drove through 1. The numbers did not advance to 0. Instead, the next overpass displayed 1 again, and the next, and the next. Every subsequent bridge showed 1, the countdown frozen at its penultimate value, refusing to complete its sequence. This continued for hours. Victor passed under dozens of overpasses, all of them displaying 1, none of them advancing to 0. The countdown had stalled, trapped in its final moment, existing perpetually at the edge of completion without ever finishing. Victor drove through the night and into the next day. 1, 1, 1. Every overpass was marked with the same number, the same cold blue light, the same sense of incompletion. Victor reached Atlanta and made his delivery, the countdown still frozen at 1, still refusing to resolve. Days passed. Victor took other jobs, drove other routes. The numbers appeared on every overpass he passed under. Always 1, never 0. Never advancing, never reversing, just maintaining that final digit indefinitely. Victor returned to the area outside Baton Rouge where the countdown had started, hoping to find answers. He drove under the original overpass, saw 1 displayed beneath it. Victor made a U-turn and approached from the opposite direction. The overpass displayed 100, starting the countdown again from the beginning. Victor understood then. The countdown was a loop, starting at 100 and reaching 1 before beginning again. But the loop only reset when Victor reversed direction completely, when he returned to origin and approached from the opposite heading. The countdown did not measure distance or time. It measured something else. Some quality of Victor's journey that existed independent of normal spatial or temporal metrics. Victor experimented, driving various routes, testing which actions caused the countdown to advance or reset. He discovered that the numbers reflected his intention rather than his location. When Victor drove with purpose, toward specific destinations with commitment to completing journeys, the countdown advanced. When Victor drove aimlessly, uncertain of destination or purpose, the numbers froze, maintaining their current value. The countdown was measuring Victor's certainty, his determination, his commitment to completing the paths he chose. And it had reached 1 and stayed there because Victor had lost that certainty, had begun questioning his choices, wondering if his current route was correct or if he should turn back, should choose differently, should reconsider his destination. Victor made a decision. He chose Atlanta definitively, committed to his delivery without reservation or doubt. The numbers immediately advanced to 0. 0 appeared on the next overpass, the digits glowing brighter than all previous numbers. Victor drove through 0 and felt a change, not physical, not measurable, but fundamental. His relationship to the road had shifted. The numbers disappeared, the countdown ending, the display vanishing as if it had never existed. But Victor was different now. He drove with absolute certainty, never questioning his routes, never doubting his choices. The countdown had taught him that hesitation was visible, measurable, that uncertainty had consequences. And by reaching 0, by driving through that final number with complete commitment to his chosen path, Victor had completed some kind of trial, had proven something to whatever force had been testing him. Victor Ramirez still drives heavy machinery across America. The numbers have not returned, but Victor operates now with the knowledge that his choices are being monitored, that his certainty or lack thereof is somehow visible to observers he cannot see. The countdown was a measurement, a test, a way of evaluating Victor's worthiness to continue driving. He passed by reaching 0, by maintaining commitment despite fear, by driving forward even when the numbers warned him that something waited at the end of their sequence. And having passed once, Victor hopes he will not be tested again. Hopes the countdown will not restart. Hopes that whatever measured his certainty was satisfied with his performance and will allow him to drive without numbers glowing beneath overpasses, counting down toward unknowable consequences that wait for drivers who fail to maintain their commitment, who hesitate too long, who allow doubt to freeze the countdown at 1 and keep them trapped in perpetual incompletion while the road continues forever ahead and the numbers never resolve. Story number 6. The driver who was already there. Melissa Chang had been hauling fuel across the Midwest for 13 years when she arrived at a delivery location before she left her pickup point. It was June of 2023, and Melissa was transporting gasoline from a refinery in Oklahoma to a distribution center in Missouri. The route was routine. Interstate 44 northeast through Tulsa and into Missouri, a drive Melissa had completed weekly for the past 6 years. Melissa left the Oklahoma refinery at 6 in the morning, her tanker truck full, her paperwork complete. The drive to Missouri should have taken approximately 5 hours. But when Melissa's phone rang after only 30 minutes of driving, the voice on the line was confused and irritated. "This is Johnson at the Missouri Distribution Center. Your truck is here, but you're not in it. Where are you?" Melissa pulled over. "I'm on Interstate 44, about 30 miles northeast of Tulsa. I won't be there for at least 4 more hours." "Then who's driving your truck?" Johnson demanded. "Your tanker is in our loading bay right now. I'm looking at it." But when I knocked on the cab door, there was no response. "The truck is here, but unmanned." Melissa checked her tanker in the mirrors. It was attached to her cab, full of fuel, clearly not in Missouri. "That's impossible. I'm looking at my truck right now. It's with me in Oklahoma." "I'm sending you a photo," Johnson said. The photo arrived on Melissa's phone. It showed her truck, her license plate, her company logo. The tanker was backed into the Missouri Distribution Center's loading bay, positioned correctly for fuel transfer. But the cab was empty, no driver visible through the windows. Melissa took her own photo showing her truck on the Oklahoma highway and sent it to Johnson. They were both looking at the same truck in different locations simultaneously. Melissa's tanker existed in 2 places, one version with her, one version already arrived at the destination. "I'm calling the police," Johnson said. "This is too strange. Either someone stole your truck and plates or something impossible is happening." Melissa ended the call and stared at her truck. It looked normal, functioned normally, responded to her controls without any indication that it was simultaneously parked in Missouri. Melissa tried to rationalize what was happening. Mistaken identity, maybe. Another truck with similar markings. But the photo Johnson had sent showed her exact license plate number, her exact vehicle identification details. Melissa drove forward carefully, watching her GPS, monitoring her location. She progressed northeast through Oklahoma as expected. But her phone rang again 20 minutes later. Johnson, even more confused. "Your truck just left." The cab remained empty, but the truck started itself, pulled out of the loading bay, and drove away. "I tried to stop it, but it just accelerated out of the facility." "What kind of operation are you running?" Melissa had no answer. Her truck was with her, but a duplicate version, had been in Missouri, had left Missouri, was presumably now driving somewhere. Melissa tried to track the duplicate using her company's fleet GPS system, but her truck showed only one location. Her location, the system reporting only the truck Melissa was currently driving. Melissa continued toward Missouri, completing her delivery route. She arrived at the distribution center 5 hours after leaving Oklahoma, exactly on schedule. Johnson met her at the gate, his expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Your truck was here this morning," he said. "Same truck, same plates, same markings. It arrived empty, didn't unload anything, just sat in the loading bay for 40 minutes, then drove away. Now you're here with a full load, on time. as if the first visit never happened. Melissa unloaded her fuel, completed the delivery paperwork, and left the distribution center. But she could not stop thinking about the duplicate truck, the version of her tanker that had arrived before she left Oklahoma, that had appeared at the destination before the journey occurred. Over the following weeks, Melissa experienced more incidents of temporal displacement. She would arrive at deliveries and find that her truck had already been there hours earlier. She would fuel at truck stops, and attendants would comment that she had just left minutes before. Other drivers on CB radio would report seeing Melissa's truck in 2 locations simultaneously, the same vehicle existing in multiple positions along her route. Melissa consulted with her company's maintenance department, had her truck inspected for GPS errors or tracking malfunctions. Everything tested normal. The truck was not reporting false positions. Reality itself was duplicating Melissa's vehicle, creating copies that existed temporally displaced, arriving at destinations before Melissa departed from origins. Melissa researched temporal phenomena, quantum mechanics, theories about time and causality. She discovered concepts like closed time-like curves, situations where time loops back on itself, where effect can precede cause. But these were theoretical constructs, mathematical models, not phenomena that should manifest in the real world as physical duplicate trucks. Then Melissa noticed a pattern. The duplicate truck always arrived at destinations exactly 5 hours before Melissa did. 5 hours was the travel time for most of Melissa's routes. The duplicate was arriving on time while Melissa was arriving late. Or from another perspective, Melissa was departing late while the duplicate departed on time. Reality was somehow splitting Melissa's journey into 2 timelines, one where she left early and arrived on time, another where she left late and arrived 5 hours delayed. But both versions were real. Both trucks existed physically. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing both the early arrival and the later arrival. Melissa existed in superposition, her truck simultaneously in 2 temporal states, one ahead of schedule and one on schedule, both realities unfolding in parallel. Melissa tried to break the pattern by departing at different times, hoping to desynchronize from the duplicate. But the duplicate adapted, always arriving 5 hours before Melissa regardless of when Melissa actually left. The temporal displacement was locked to Melissa specifically, not to clock time or schedule, following whatever rules governed her split existence. Then one day, Melissa encountered the duplicate directly. She was approaching a truck stop when she saw her own truck parked at a fuel pump. Same vehicle, same markings, but empty, no driver visible. Melissa pulled up beside the duplicate and climbed down. She approached the other truck and looked through the window. The cab was empty but active. The engine was running. The dashboard displays were lit. Everything suggested a driver had just stepped away momentarily. But Melissa checked the nearby facilities, the convenience store, the restaurant. No one had seen another driver matching her description. The duplicate truck was autonomous, operating without human control, existing as a ghost of Melissa's journey that completed routes independently of Melissa's presence. Melissa climbed into the duplicate truck's cab. The interior was identical to her own truck, same wear patterns on the seat, same personal items in the storage compartments, same logbook showing the exact deliveries Melissa was scheduled to make. The duplicate was not just physically identical. It was temporally identical, existing as a complete copy of Melissa's truck, including its history and future routes. The duplicate truck started moving. Melissa had not touched the controls, had not engaged the transmission, but the truck pulled away from the fuel pump and merged onto the highway. Melissa was a passenger in her own duplicate vehicle, experiencing her journey from 5 hours in the future, riding in a truck that was completing a delivery run that Melissa would physically drive later that day. The duplicate drove perfectly, following the exact route Melissa had planned. making the same navigation choices Melissa would have made. It stopped at the scheduled delivery location, backed into the loading bay autonomously, and waited. Melissa climbed down and walked away from the duplicate. Behind her, she heard the fuel transfer equipment connecting, heard the duplicate's tank emptying, heard the delivery being completed without her involvement. Melissa returned to her original truck and drove the route again, 5 hours behind the duplicate. She arrived at the delivery location and found paperwork showing 2 deliveries, both from her truck, both signed with her signature, though Melissa had only signed once. Reality had completed her route twice, once with the duplicate and once with Melissa, both versions counting as legitimate deliveries. Melissa Chang still drives fuel tankers across the Midwest. The duplicate truck continues, appearing, arriving 5 hours early, completing Melissa's routes independently. Melissa has accepted this as her new normal, this existence in temporal superposition where her journeys happen twice, once ahead of her and once through her, both realities valid, both trucks real. She drives knowing that somewhere ahead of her, a duplicate version of herself is already delivering the cargo, is already completing the tasks, is existing 5 hours in the future while Melissa exists in the present. Both of them the same person, the same truck, the same journey unfolding in 2 temporal states that maintain parallel reality because time itself has decided that Melissa Chang must exist in both past and future simultaneously. Must drive routes that have already been driven by her future self while her present self drives them again, completing a loop that has no beginning and no end, only an eternal present where Melissa is always arriving, always departing, always existing 5 hours behind herself in a race she can never win because the finish line is always reached by her duplicate before Melissa gets there, leaving her to drive forever in the wake of her own ghost. Story number 7. The Load That Got Heavier. James Patterson had been hauling construction materials for 25 years when he picked up a load that weighed more with each passing mile. It was October of 2022, and James was transporting steel beams from Pittsburgh to Cleveland in his Peterbilt 389. The load weighed 42,000 pounds at pickup, properly balanced and secured, well within legal weight limits and his truck's capacity. James weighed at the facility scale before departing. 42,000 pounds total. He collected his paperwork, secured his load straps one final time, and began the drive north through Pennsylvania. Interstate 79 through the early morning darkness, a route James knew well enough to drive in his sleep. The first way station was 30 miles from pickup. James pulled onto the scales as required for all commercial vehicles. The scale displayed a weight significantly higher than his initial measurement. 47,000 pounds. 5,000 pounds more than 30 miles previous. The way station attendant checked James's paperwork, noted the discrepancy, and asked James to pull over for inspection. James complied, parking in the designated area while inspectors examined his load. They counted the steel beams, verified the cargo matched his manifest, checked for hidden materials or unauthorized additions. Everything was correct. The load contained exactly what James's paperwork specified. But it weighed 5,000 pounds more than it had weighed at pickup. "Your pickup scale must have been miscalibrated," the inspector said. "The weight we're showing is accurate. You're still legal, but just barely. Be careful." James continued north, troubled by the weight discrepancy. He had used that pickup facility hundreds of times. Their scales were regularly inspected and certified. A 5,000-pound error was impossible, would have been noticed and corrected immediately. But James had no explanation except scale malfunction, so he accepted the inspector's theory and drove on. The next way station was 60 miles north. James pulled onto the scales expecting to see the same 47,000 pounds the previous station had measured. Instead, the scale displayed 52,000 pounds, another 5,000-pound increase. James's total weight now exceeded legal limits. The weigh station attendant issued a citation and ordered James to reduce his load or obtain an overweight permit. James pulled over again. Inspectors examined his load again. Same steel beams, same quantity, same manifest. But the weight had increased impossibly, his truck growing heavier with distance traveled rather than remaining constant as physics required. The inspectors had no explanation. They suggested James return to Pittsburgh and have his load reweighed at the origin facility, but James was already 100 miles into his journey, and returning would cost time and fuel. James called his dispatcher and explained the situation. The dispatcher was skeptical but agreed to contact the Pittsburgh facility and verify their scale calibration. While James waited, he felt his truck's suspension settling lower, the increased weight pressing down on the axles, making the steering feel heavier. The brakes require more pressure. The dispatcher called back. Pittsburgh confirms their scale was correct, 42,000 pounds at pickup. I don't know what to tell you, James. 3 different scales can't all be wrong. James sat in his cab trying to understand. The load was getting heavier, not through addition of material but through some impossible process that increased the weight of existing material. The steel beams were gaining mass, accumulating pounds with each mile traveled, growing denser or more massive or subject to forces that exceeded normal gravity. James decided to continue despite the weight violation, hoping to reach Cleveland before the load became too heavy to move. He paid the overweight fine and pulled back onto the interstate. Every mile north brought a subtle increase in weight. James felt it through his truck's performance. The engine worked harder. The transmission shifted differently. The brakes heated up from the additional mass they had to slow. 50 miles later, James's truck struggled to maintain highway speed. The engine was at maximum output but could barely push the load to 50 miles per hour on level road. Hills became nearly impossible. James's truck crawling upward at 15 miles per hour while lighter vehicles passed easily. The load had gained additional weight, though James had not stopped at another weigh station to confirm the exact amount. James pulled off the interstate onto a state route, searching for a scale to measure his current weight. He found one at a grain elevator, a facility with scales designed for agricultural trucks. James drove onto the scale and watched the display climb. 57,000 pounds, 60,000, 65,000. The scale reached 70,000 pounds and continued climbing, 75, 80, 85, before stabilizing at 92,000 pounds. James had gained 50,000 pounds since Pittsburgh. His 42,000-pound load now weighed 92,000 pounds, more than doubling in mass over less than 200 miles of travel. At this rate, James's truck would be unable to move within another 100 miles, the load becoming too heavy for his engine to propel, too massive for his brakes to stop, too dense for reality itself to support. James climbed out of his cab and approached his trailer. The steel beams looked normal, unchanged in appearance. But when James touched one, he felt its weight, felt the impossible mass concentrated in metal that should have weighed far less. The beams were not larger, they were denser. Every molecule had gained mass, every atom had accumulated weight. The fundamental structure of the steel was transforming into something heavier than steel should be. James called his dispatcher again, demanded they contact the Pittsburgh facility and determine what he was actually hauling. While he waited, James researched unusual materials, exotic metals, substances that could gain mass. He found references to osmium, the densest naturally occurring element, but osmium did not spontaneously gain mass. He found theoretical particles, strange matter, and dark matter, but these were physics concepts that should not exist as cargo in his trailer. The dispatcher called back with disturbing news. Pittsburgh says the steel was recently imported. Foreign origin, exact source classified. The material is experimental, some kind of new alloy designed for extreme applications. They didn't tell us it had unusual properties. Unusual properties? James shouted into his phone. It's gaining weight. It's going to crush my truck. Get to Cleveland as fast as you can, the dispatcher said. The receiving facility knows how to handle it. They have specialized equipment. Just get there before it gets too heavy to move. James drove back onto the highway and pushed north. His truck groaned under the load. The suspension compressed to its limits. The tires bulged from the weight pressing down on them. James's speed dropped to 30 miles per hour on level ground, 10 miles per hour on slight inclines. Other vehicles gave him wide berth, drivers recognizing that James's truck was struggling abnormally, sensing something wrong with the load. Cleveland appeared on the horizon. James's load had reached approximately 120,000 pounds based on how the truck handled. The steel beams were now 6 times their original weight, crushing down on the trailer, warping the frame, stress cracking the wheel mounts. James's truck was disintegrating slowly under impossible mass. James reached the Cleveland facility just as his rear tires blew simultaneously, shredded by weight they were never designed to carry. The truck lurched, settled, stopped. James climbed down on shaking legs and watched as specialized equipment approached. Cranes rated for extreme heavy lifting, equipment designed for masses far exceeding normal construction materials. The facility crew unloaded James's steel beams using equipment that struggled even with their massive capacity. Each beam weighed thousands of pounds more than it should have, the experimental alloy having gained mass exactly as the Pittsburgh facility had known it would, exactly as they had failed to warn James would happen during transport. The beams were delivered to a containment area stored in special racks designed to support impossibly dense materials. A facility supervisor approached James as his damaged truck was being assessed. "We're sorry you weren't properly briefed. The alloy absorbs gravitational potential energy as it moves across the Earth's surface. It converts position into mass, gaining weight with distance traveled. The effect reverses if you drive the material back to its origin point. If you had turned around, the beams would have gotten lighter." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" James demanded. "Security restrictions. The material is classified. Knowing its properties could allow adversaries to identify its purpose. Drivers are typically not informed. We just load it, ship it, and unload it as quickly as possible before the weight gain becomes critical." James's truck was totaled, the frame irreparably damaged by weight it had never been designed to carry. The company provided James with a replacement truck, compensated him for the damage, and asked him to sign non-disclosure agreements about the cargo and its properties. James signed, having no better option, and tried to forget about steel that gained mass with distance traveled. But James Patterson never forgot. He refused contracts involving experimental materials, declined routes from facilities known to handle classified cargo, and maintained careful awareness of how his loads behaved. Because James had learned that cargo was not always what manifests claimed, that steel beams could gain impossible weight, that materials existed which violated basic physics and crushed trucks beneath them, while facility supervisors apologized for not warning drivers about the impossible properties of the things they hauled across America in vehicles designed for normal reality, but occasionally pressed into service carrying materials that came from laboratories where the rules were different and mass was not constant. And steel could weigh 6 times what steel should weigh after traveling 200 miles through a landscape where gravitational potential transformed into additional pounds pressing down on trucks driven by men who were never told what they were really transporting until it was too late, and their vehicles were destroyed by cargo that rewrote physics 1 mile at a time. Story number 8, the town of permanent residents. Sharon Mitchell had been driving medical supplies across the Northeast for 14 years when she delivered to a town where no one ever left. It was November of 2023, and Sharon was transporting pharmaceutical products from Boston to a hospital in rural Vermont. The route took her through small towns and back roads, the kind of delivery that required paper maps and careful attention to turn-by-turn directions. The town was called Millerton, population 800, located in the mountains of northern Vermont. Sharon's GPS directed her to a hospital on the edge of town, a small facility serving the surrounding rural area. The hospital looked modern despite the town's remote location, clean and well-maintained, busy with staff and patients moving through its corridors. Sharon backed her truck up to the receiving dock and began unloading pharmaceutical products. The hospital's receiving manager was friendly, chatty, asking Sharon about her drive and whether she had encountered the early snow that had fallen the previous night. Sharon answered politely while working, following her usual professional routine. "Do you ever leave Millerton?" the manager asked casually. "I'm leaving as soon as I finish unloading," Sharon replied. The manager smiled strangely. "I meant before. Have you been to Millerton before and left successfully?" Sharon paused, confused by the phrasing. "This is my first delivery here. Why would leaving be unsuccessful?" "Most people who come to Millerton don't leave," the manager said. "Not because they don't want to, but because they can't. The roads only go in. They don't go out. You can drive to Millerton easily. Driving away is more difficult." Sharon laughed nervously. "That's not possible. Roads work in both directions." "Usually," the manager agreed. "But Millerton is special. The town exists in a pocket, a geographic anomaly. Entry is easy. Exit requires luck or specific knowledge. Most visitors end up staying permanently. They become residents, part of the community. They adapt to not leaving." Sharon finished unloading, collected her signed paperwork, and climbed back into her truck. She would have dismissed the manager's strange comments as local humor or hazing of new delivery drivers, but something about the man's tone suggested he believed what he said, that he was providing genuine warning rather than making jokes. Sharon started her engine and pulled away from the hospital. She drove back toward the center of Millerton, retracing the route she had used to enter the town. But as Sharon approached the town limits, the road curved unexpectedly, turning back toward town center instead of continuing straight out of Millerton as her GPS indicated it should. Sharon stopped and checked her paper maps. They showed the road continuing straight, but reality showed the road curving. Sharon tried a different street, another exit route. Same result. The road curved back toward town, refusing to lead away from Millerton. Sharon drove around Millerton for an hour, trying every street, every route, every possible exit. All roads led back to town center. The town was a trap, a geographic loop where entry was possible but exit was not, where roads curved back on themselves in violation of normal topology. Sharon pulled into a parking lot and grabbed her phone. No signal. She tried her CB radio, static on all channels. Millerton was isolated, cut off from normal communication, accessible from the outside but unable to communicate with the outside once you entered. Sharon walked into a nearby cafe, needing information. The cafe was full of people, locals chatting over coffee and meals. Sharon approached the counter and asked the waitress about leaving Millerton. "Oh, you're a new visitor," the waitress said kindly. "Most people figure it out within a few hours. Millerton doesn't let people leave easily. The town exists in a fold, a place where geography loops back on itself. You can leave if you know the exit pattern, but most people never figure it out. They just stay. Join the community. We're all trapped here together, might as well make the best of it." "How long have you been trapped?" Sharon asked. 15 years, the waitress replied cheerfully. I came through on vacation, couldn't find my way out, eventually stopped trying. I have a good life here. Job, friends, apartment. Millerton takes care of its permanent residents. Sharon looked around the cafe at the other customers. They all looked content, happy, adjusted to their permanent residence in a town that would not let them leave. These were people who had driven into Millerton for various reasons and had become trapped, had transformed from visitors to residents because the roads refused to let them exit. "What's the exit pattern?" Sharon asked. The waitress shrugged. "No one knows exactly, it changes. Some people say you need to drive at specific speeds. Others say you need to make specific turns in specific sequences. A few people have left over the years. They figured out the pattern somehow. But most of us stay. It's easier than constantly trying to escape." Sharon refused to accept permanent residence. She returned to her truck and spent the rest of the day driving different routes, testing various speeds, trying random turn sequences. Nothing worked. Every path led back to Millerton Center. Every attempt to exit looped back to the beginning. Night fell. Sharon parked her truck and tried to sleep, but anxiety kept her awake. She was trapped in a town that shouldn't exist, caught in a geographic anomaly that violated basic laws of topology and navigation. And the residents were content, had adapted to their imprisonment, had accepted that Millerton was now their permanent home. The next morning, Sharon tried again. She drove methodically, mapping every street, documenting every curve, trying to identify patterns in how the roads behaved. Millerton's geography was not random. The loops had structure, the turns had rules. There was logic underlying which roads led to which other roads, even when that logic violated normal expectations. By noon, Sharon thought she had identified a pattern. Certain streets seemed less likely to loop back to center. Certain turn combinations took Sharon farther from town before curving back. Sharon was mapping the boundaries of Millerton's trap, finding the edges of the geographic pocket. Sharon combined her observations into a route. She drove slowly, following the specific sequence of turns she had identified, maintaining careful speed, watching for the moment when reality would stop looping and would allow linear progress away from Millerton. The town resisted. Streets tried to curve Sharon back toward center. But Sharon anticipated the curves, compensated, maintained her bearing through force of will and careful navigation. And then Sharon was out. The road straightened. Millerton fell away behind her. Sharon's GPS confirmed she was leaving. That distance from the town was increasing normally, that she had broken free of the geographic loop. Sharon accelerated, putting miles between herself and Millerton, refusing to look back, refusing to risk being pulled back into the town's gravity. Sharon reached Normal Highway and called her dispatcher. She reported successful delivery but said she would never return to Millerton, would never accept another contract to that location. The dispatcher agreed without argument, noting that several other drivers had reported navigation difficulties in that area. Sharon Mitchell still drives medical supplies across the Northeast, but she plans her routes carefully now, avoids rural Vermont, declines deliveries to small mountain towns, because Sharon knows that Millerton is still there, still trapping visitors, still converting drivers into permanent residents. And Sharon knows that her escape was partial luck, that the exit pattern she discovered might not work a second time, that Millerton's geography might have changed to close the route Sharon found. The town of permanent residents still exists in the Vermont mountains, accessible from normal roads but refusing to release those who enter. And somewhere in Millerton, the hospital receiving manager is waiting for the next delivery driver, ready to offer the same warning Sharon received, the same explanation about roads that only go in, hoping that some drivers will be clever enough or lucky enough to find the pattern that allows escape before they become permanent residents like him. Like the waitress, like the 800 other people trapped in a town that geography has decided cannot be left. only entered, only joined, only accepted as a permanent location in lives that were meant to be mobile, but have become forever fixed in a place where the roads curve back on themselves and no amount of driving brings you closer to the exits that lead to the outside world where normal topology applies and towns can be visited and departed from, rather than entered and permanently inhabited. Story number 9. The auction for tomorrow's route. Leonard Brooks had been hauling freight independently for 27 years when he attended an auction where routes were sold before they existed. It was August of 2022 and Leonard was looking for new contracts, new opportunities to keep his Mac anthem busy. Another independent driver mentioned an auction being held at a truck stop outside Memphis, an event where high-value routes were offered to drivers willing to pay premium prices for premium contracts. Leonard arrived at the truck stop around 7 in the evening. The auction was being held in a large meeting room attended by perhaps 50 other drivers, all of them independents looking for work. The auctioneer was a woman in her 50s, professional and organized, presenting routes on a large screen showing maps, destinations, and payment amounts. The first few routes were normal. Deliveries from Memphis to various cities, reasonable distances, competitive pay. Leonard bid on one but was outbid by another driver willing to accept lower payment. The auction continued through a dozen routes, all of them legitimate contracts that Leonard recognized as valuable but not extraordinary. Then the auctioneer announced the premium routes. "These next contracts are special," she said. "They pay significantly more than standard rates because they involve delivery to locations that haven't been finalized yet. You'll be given the cargo and told to drive. The destination will be revealed during the journey. These routes are ideal for drivers comfortable with uncertainty and flexible scheduling." Leonard was intrigued. He had driven many routes where destinations changed mid-journey due to client needs or supply chain adjustments. If the pay was good enough, uncertainty was acceptable. The auctioneer presented the first premium route. Chicago to undetermined destination, payment of $15,000, cargo is sealed electronics. Delivery must be completed within 72 hours of departure. Bidding started high. Drivers competed aggressively, recognizing that $15,000 was exceptional pay even for a long-distance delivery. Leonard bid conservatively, was outbid, and watched as the route sold for a fraction of its payment value, the winning driver getting an incredibly profitable contract. More premium routes were auctioned. All of them offered extraordinary payment for delivery to undetermined destinations. All of them sold quickly to eager drivers. Leonard began to suspect something was wrong. No legitimate client paid such high rates for flexible delivery. The premium routes were too good, their terms too vague, their payments too generous. But when the final premium route was announced, Leonard's financial needs overcame his suspicion. Kansas City to undetermined destination, payment of $20,000, cargo is medical supplies, delivery must be completed within 48 hours. Leonard bid aggressively, won the auction, and paid the deposit required to secure the contract. Leonard picked up the medical supplies in Kansas City 3 days later. The cargo was loaded by crew who provided minimal information, just handed Leonard sealed containers and told him to start driving west. "You'll receive destination coordinates within 6 hours," they said. "Just drive and wait for instructions." Leonard drove west on Interstate 70 waiting for the coordinates. 6 hours passed without contact. Leonard tried calling the phone number provided by the auction, but the call went to voicemail. Leonard continued west, entering Colorado, still waiting for destination information. 12 hours after departure, Leonard's GPS suddenly updated, displaying a route to a location in western Colorado, a facility in the mountains outside Glenwood Springs. Leonard followed the new route, driving through the night, arriving at the facility around dawn. The facility was abandoned. No staff, no vehicles, no signs of recent activity. But the loading dock was open, and as Leonard backed his truck up to it, equipment activated automatically. Robotic systems unloaded Leonard's cargo without human intervention, transferring the medical supplies into the facility's interior. Leonard watched, confused but unable to intervene. When the unloading completed, an envelope dropped from a pneumatic tube near the loading dock. Leonard opened it and found his payment, $20,000 in certified checks along with a note. "Thank you for delivery. The destination existed as of your arrival time. It will cease to exist within 1 hour of your departure. Please leave immediately." Leonard did not understand, but he left, driving away from the facility. In his rearview mirror, Leonard saw the building start to fade, becoming transparent, dissolving into nothing.